So good, so good, so good.
Spring styles are at Nordstrom Rack stores now, and they're up to 60% off. Stock up and save on Rag & Bone, Madewell, Vince, All Saints, and more of your favorites.
How did I not know Rack has Adidas?
Why do we rack? For the hottest deals.
Just so many good brands.
Join the Nordy Club to unlock exclusive discounts, shop new arrivals first, and more. Plus, buy online and pick up at your favorite Rack store for free. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
Study
and play come together on a Windows 11 PC.
And for a limited time, college students get
the best of both worlds.
Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Welcome to Why We Roll,
a tabletop role-playing game design podcast by the Stillfleet Studio.
We're your hosts, Chris Pickett, creator of the historical fantasy game Dance Macabre,
and Wythe Marshall, creator of the political sci-fi game Stillfleet.
Through the show, we hope to amplify new creative voices.
We chat with different indie TTRPG designers, talking through a range of questions that are pertinent to many designers, players, and GMs.
We hope to showcase fresh and even challenging ideas about what makes imagination-based games so powerful.
Before we introduce today's guest, a reminder. If you enjoy this episode, please consider supporting the show and all of our games over at patreon.com/Stillfleet.
Okay, let's find out why we roll.
Hey, what's up? This is Wythe from Why We Roll, here for just a little quick bonus edition. We're trying to pack in more because we have just amazing guests who have booked up our schedule for 2026, but we still hear about great games and people we know want to get them on and tease some of the great work that they're doing. So in this case, Ben Eastman, whom we met from Ben, your podcast, you have a game that just came out from Plus One XP's RPG Zine Club, which I've also been able to publish a game through, and I'm a big fan of that program overall. And this game is really cool, and it gets at a lot of themes, kind of discussions of art, authenticity, capitalism, kind of the evolution or devolution of art as an industry in the global north, and it's just funny. It's a funny, quick zine with a rules-light approach, with a great system, literally called Fuck Around and Find Out. So without further ado, we're just doing a little quick teaser about Elise on Art by Ben Eastman, and we'll have to have you back on for a longer discussion of kind of your design praxis. But before we go any further, Ben, do you just want to introduce yourself and say a little in your words about your new game and what you're excited about?
Yeah, so Ben Eastman, as mentioned, I do a podcast called All Year I Dream About Gaming Conventions. It's all about attending gaming conventions, which is how I first, Stillfleet and Wythe and the team roamed into my viewpoint. I also have been I've been writing games for conventions for a dozen years now, if not longer. I've been designing games now. I think 2017 was the first thing I've self-published. I've freelanced for a number of folks, Cobalt Press in their Tales of the Valiant in 5th edition. My name's on a bunch of stuff with them. If you've seen the recent Stargate SG-1 RPG, that was kind of a dream thing for me. That's one of my properties that I love the most. But I also do sort of my own thing, and I do things for other people. And so, as you mentioned, Plus One Experience, I was in the Plus One Experience Discord server, and one of the people it was around the time that the Pinkertons showed up at a Magic streamer's door and very, very threateningly took a bunch of product that had been, I think, given to him most likely fairly legally. But the good folks at Wizards of the Coast were not super excited about it. And, so someone made a joke, like, what would happen if like the Pinkertons showed up to try to steal all the art that, they didn't want out anymore. And I said, what would happen with that? And so I put together this idea of about a lease on art. In my real life, I work as an attorney. I work in corporate law, which gives me an interesting, I think, very interesting viewpoint when it comes to this sort of thing, where I'm in the belly of the beast, and yet I'm commenting about the churning bile and stomach acid that's coming around as well. But really, it's all about, like, I think about all of these different things that used to be like, you'd go and, I'm going to sound like a boomer, but you'd go and you'd buy an album, you'd go and you'd buy a record, and you would have something, you'd hold something in your hands, and you would be able to keep it, and you'd be able to use it for whatever it is that you wanted to. And anymore, with the streaming is great in the sense that I don't have to go buy something. I don't have to go to a Blockbuster or a Hollywood Video or rent it. And that is, that's an inconvenience to me. But at the same point, you don't own anything. You're just leased it. The MP3s you buy, you don't buy. You get the right to use them until Amazon Music, or I suppose for a different file format like Apple Music or Tidal decides, well, you don't get that anymore, and it's gone. So that, to some degree, is what has gave me the inspiration, the springboard to write A Lease on Art, which imagines a future world of 2022 where the corporations have convinced the government that physical media needs to be outlawed, and that any physical media should be destroyed. And you play as an intrepid group of preservers. That's the player name. We're trying to preserve what's left from that purge. And at the same time, you're competing with bootlickers, and you're competing with narcs, and you're competing with agents who are hired by these corpos who don't want to get their hands dirty. They're going to pay somebody to get their hands dirty to do the job for them. And all these agencies are named after 1990s albums and songs, because one of my favorite records from the 90s is Pinkerton by Wythe.
And the whole shtick of the book is really is playing around with that, and I think there's a lot of great puns and just kind of musical thought that goes into it. But it's really broadly, I mean, it's a rules light zine, and it seems to approach this idea more broadly than just music. At least that's how I read it.
Right.
Because as much as I love music, I felt like this was really speaking to, you sort of speak to different kinds of artists, different kinds of roles that artists play sort of in society, their different callings. And it felt like it's a game that really broadly is emulating kind of two things. One is like being an artist, and so it's a sort of almost story game about being an artist with an adventure game that's a heist format. And you've kind of mashed the two together to make a nice, quick adventure-some zine. But it's very, very different from like a D&D. This isn't like a D&D or OSR like modern game. This is really an innovative game with a simple system that is asking players to steal back their own art from these Pinkertons. Right. And I think that it's a cool narrative structure that's very specific, which I like, but it opens onto this big world of all the art you can imagine, all the different ways you could imagine being an artist and wanting to sort of stick it to the man. So I think it's nice because it has that ability to get someone in, but then they can really go a lot of different ways with it.
I'm a musician, so like when it comes in the art that's immediately within my hand is I have a vinyl record of the new Joyce Manor album that came out recently, and so I mean it's books, it's paintings, it's all these things where we want to value, and we say that we value these things, but when the time comes to actually pay for it, we're going to take the path of least resistance, and it's not how art necessarily gets made. So. Yeah.
Well, and it's endemic, right? As you point out, it's not just streaming music, which is I will be the first to admit, like I love the idea of supporting artists, but it is much easier to discover new music song by song on a streaming app than to have to, even just from an informational perspective, forgetting the amount of money that goes to the artist versus the sort of middleman tech company. But it's easier to find that music through the kind of discovery services of that middleman, and then actually be delivered it whenever I need, as opposed to having to go find a physical object. So you can see how over time, this has just gone across industries in a direction of the tech companies, the people with the platforms holding the power, and all you're doing is imagining an alt history or very near future, right? That this kind of even worse dystopia. I think we're kind of in a dystopia in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, the future of 2022 was really just like, oh, there's some real bad stuff that I don't want to make people necessarily need to unpack, while also dealing with the rest of the things that I'm proposing, which is probably not too far off from the truth itself. So, anyways, so yeah, it's a rules light system. Sort of the premise is based around you're going to do things, and it's going to be a discussion between you as the preserver of the player, and the GM, who's the CEO, and you're going to spend time describing what's happening. It's a back and forth, but when something is set to occur and the outcome is in question, you are fucking around. And at that point, you make sure you describe what it is you're doing sufficiently so the CEO knows what's going on. Then you're going to roll a D12. You really only need one D12 to play this game. If you roll and you get a 10 or higher, you're going to do exactly what you want in the way you want to do it, provided that is logical. The underpinning thing here is you can't do things that are impossible, obviously. But if you get a 7 to a 9, you succeed, but there's a minor inconvenience, setback, consequence. A 4 to 6 is a somewhat major setback, and then you get from the 1 to 3, a very significant setback. And it, part of what I spill a lot of ink on in the CEO section, because there's a lot of people who hopefully are coming into indie games from something else, but are used to having the expectation that you're rolling. In a lot of D20 games, there's nothing a die roll can't fix. Figure it out that way. But here it's really intended to give a GM advice on how to get something that's a lot closer to being a diceless game, as opposed to being, we're going to roll for everything and see what's going to happen. And, you assume a certain amount of time there's going to be success and you're going to get through that way. It's like you almost want to avoid rolling the dice, because only 1 in 4 times are you going to do things the way you want to.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great use of, to me, the range too, just as a mechanics nerd, of the D12, where it's basically, it could be a D4 game, but with the D12, you can give people a +1 or +2 as a huge boost, and it mitigates against the worst, options being on the table, the 1 to 3. So if they get enough of a boost going in, they know that they might fail, but they're not going to have the sort of super failures. So there's different kinds of rolls. There's the standard just 1 through 4, very unlikely to succeed the way exactly that I want, but sure, I'll roll for it because I have to, which is great. As you said, it really sets up, do you really want to roll for it? And kind of, getting players to think differently about what it means to roll and be in an epic situation, because at the end of the day, they're not superheroes. It's not a power fantasy. They're artists, they're working artists, and they care, and they're trying hard, but they're fighting, in a way, and whether, how much you want us to think about specific aspects, they're fighting like a real material system that is oppressing them and us and everybody else. And it's, here it's represented with these, kind of band, or, Weezer album named groups. But, you can imagine, right? One can spiral and imagine the worst of the reality around us and how that would be hard if we as artists, right? If you and, we got our friends and we went and tried to resist them, what would that really look like? So I think it makes sense to have that kind of high failure system. And I love the name. I just have to say that it's really saying, look, do you want to fuck around? Do you actually want to do this? And yes, if you want to do it, then go ahead. That's your right as the player. But, I'm not sort of imposing these checks all the time, as in many other systems. So I get what you're saying, but it's not diceless, but it's sort of almost tending to remind the player, like, hey, is there some way to talk this out that is less risky? Which again is good for a heist narrative, right?
Or how do you go about doing it in a way that you understand how, there are stakes, they recognize the stakes, and they need to go about doing it. Figuring out the way it is that they're actually going about and trying to achieve their goals, because bullets do hurt. You're not going to stare down the evil corporation in quite the same way. Yeah, the goal is you succeed. We want to tell a fun story, right? But it's a system sort of grounded in reality. And if you're going to leap across a building, an open alley between two buildings, you're not playing necessarily. Well, I suppose you could, but you're not really, as described, you're not really playing a high action film sort of thing. So, there's a real chance of failure, and something bad might happen. Obviously, again, I think I try to spill a link about ways to use indie design mechanics to, the first failure is not the worst thing in the world. You kind of have to, part of the social contract between the player and the GM, the preserver and the CEO in this case, is that you're there to have fun. And literally rule zero, you could watch paint dry. And, if you're not having fun, why don't you go watch paint dry? So you want everybody to have fun. You want to tell a story that's interesting, and, you go about doing it. The other thing is sort of like, how do you address in a heist, especially with a binary system, how to go about handling failure. So if failure is failure and it's the worst thing in the world, I've actually designed a bunch in the 5e space. One of the thing that I have on DM's Guild, which is a three Platinum Adventures, are all based around introducing what we called a complication points mechanic. So as you go through, you fail things. You don't fail outright. You just give the GM a series of narrative points depending on how bad you fail. And at some point, the GM gets to turn that on you when the heist goes sideways. And that's much more interesting to me, because that's how you're going to do an Ocean's 11. That's how you're going to do a lease on art, things like that. I didn't necessarily impose that there. Really, it's just, CEO, you need to be aware that you need to have players to come and play with you. And part of having players to come and play with you is them making sure that they have fun and don't feel like it's adversarial.
Yeah, and also that it's not to me, AABB, which is something I think non-veteran GMs can fall into, of it's sort of A leads to B leads to C, and there's no real surprise for either party, the GM or the player. Whereas what you're describing, I've described in the grid system as narrative holds. And level 1, you get a narrative hold, and it doesn't mean that failure is so much worse in the moment. It means that the GM can introduce a perpendicular consequence later on, which can derail the plot in a more productive way for both players and GM. So it's not even necessarily about the level of badness. I think it's about sort of surprise and saying, look, you've kind of triggered the fact that life is random, and like any good Coen Brothers movie, or even a high, budget like an Ocean's movie, there are moments where the security guard just goes back because, hey, they need to pee. So they go back down the hall that they're supposed to have left. And, oh my God, I ran into him, right? And it's, again, well, maybe I knock him out. Maybe he's actually like, yeah, fuck my boss. Go, here's my card, go steal that thing. But I think that kind of mechanic, it makes sense for a rules-like game with a heist to really foreground, what are we stealing and why? And then have a relatively simple system for resolution, and tell players, don't worry about a lot of the stuff, only roll when it really matters. I think I can imagine already sort of playing this in a very cinematic mode. And I like that a lot of the zine, what is actually in Elise and Art, is sort of about the artist and their background and their kind of drive, and what's brought them to the point of saying, hey, I am going to resist, and I am not, this is not my bag, I'm not a soldier, I'm not an ex-spy or something, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I really want to steal back this album or painting, whatever. So I think it's fun that has a little bit of the classic choose your class, kind of vibe, but you've broken them up a little differently, and I think there's something innovative too to sort of, okay, who is a preserver? What does it mean to be in this world where art is it's still made, but it's all owned by sort of these corporate groups, and I think that is. If you are a working artist, you're like, oh man, this is really close to home. So I definitely want the preservers to win. So I don't know if you could say, any more about just example games you've played through, how you've play tested, any of the story arcs you've explored. There's some examples in there, but just if there's any you want to highlight for listeners, yeah.
I mean, one thing, if you're not super interested in the whole theme of Elise on Art, but the idea of FAFO interests you, it's so very loose that you can get away with it. I designed this to be something that someone can tell me, who they are. So you're going to have your role. So what are you doing in the heist? You're going to have your calling, why you're doing that. And you're going to have your background, what led you to that. And you're going to have like a skill or, a flaw and different things about that. Like I've run this game before. The original version of FAFO was run I sat down with a group of new players and they I said, okay, what game are we playing? And they're like, what? And like, yeah, what setting are we playing? We're playing Wild West. And okay, and tell me, and I asked like 5 or 6 questions, and I ran an adventure for them. And these new players had played some amount of D&D, I think is what it was. And they've played, I actually quite like, the Star Wars D6, system by West End. It runs a little slower and it is definitely a product of its time, but at the same point, Star Wars D6, I think, holds up better than a lot of 1980s role-playing game systems. But like, they've since joined that group I'm playing in it as a player, and I ruined them a little bit on it because I just literally sat down and made up a whole setting, which was, it's Wild West. You're in a saloon. You're solving a murder mystery, but until you find clues every time you walk into a different room, you get teleported into a different random room. So it's easy enough to go about doing, like, if you're interested in the idea of FAFO, and you can't pick out from listening to this how relatively simple it is, check out the game. Consider picking it up. The folks at Plus One Experience are the ones who are going to be largely profiting off of this. I license to them for frankly a pittance because I believe in the zine club, and I do well for myself. Like, I don't want to brag, but I do okay for myself. And so, the people who rely on this for their living, I felt it was more important that they get paid more. So the cover artist, Brandon, should be getting paid more. The editor and the layout person, Strega, and I've forgotten my editor's name, so I apologize. I should definitely know better, but Richard and Tony and Wes and people who, this is their livelihood, and, they should benefit out of it. What I'm going to do, buy another guitar pedal. But check it out, because I think it is a pretty universal system that's easily hackable. Just requires a little bit of time and an idea as to some of the tropes for whatever system you're looking to run. So that's another thing to consider there. But you asked me about some playtest examples. So holding aside, I think it was like Wild West Portal is the way I characterized it. Going through, and the example out of the back of the book with the Chainsaw Factory with the Ramones, is taken directly from like a game that I played with some of my friends from the hardcore scene in Syracuse, New York, back in the early aughts. Wow. That shouldn't feel as old to say as it is. Going through another instance, I had a friend I was running it for who was really into puzzles. And so part of it was like trying to get the art in order to make puzzles for, going through and making the art for the puzzles. And it's, you introduce the complication and going through and making sure that, it's sort of a rewarding thing. You do enough to, as CEO, you got to do enough to mess with the player that you maintain the kayfabe that is being slightly antagonistic, while also recognizing at the end of the day, the point is to have fun. And ultimately the success is the fun that the player is looking for. So, I mean, I've been running games for 20 plus years now, and you kind of get a feel for it. But yeah, some of those things are just like figuring out what the players like and building adventures out of it based on, writing up some bullet points, asking leading questions or asking broad questions and letting them lead you to the answers.
That's that all sounds like great advice. Again, regardless of system, and I do think some of the most fun is just telling people, hey, what kind of game do you want to play? Or rather asking them that, right? And then they tell you whatever information and you kind of go with it. And that's such a fun way to GM and something I definitely encourage. Sometimes on the show, we talk about games and systems, but there are also just modes or there's kind of meta, like modalities, like how do you have fun with people, as you say. At the end of the day, it's you and your friends having fun. And sometimes, for whatever reason, someone doesn't really love a setting or seems confused by a system or you just don't have time or whatever. So, of course, when you have a system built around a smaller number of mechanics, it's a little easier to do that. And in your case, there's really just the one die. There's one resolution mechanic. GMs don't roll. So, yeah, certainly it's in that tradition. But I liked it because I do think sometimes games can be too rules light to really still work as games in the same way that traditional adventure games do devolve physics onto the die roll. They say, look, neither the GM or the player know what's going to happen. We're going to all find out. And I like that your game still has the essence of that. But because the game is more about kind of the difference between techno-corporate art and authentic, art that has the aura of the maker, and the maker has some, they're paid, that's their vocation. They put their life into it. In some ways, we've also moved away from, okay, we're going to roll for everything and have lots of gunfights and stuff. So I think it does make sense in that sense. I see you're saying that it could work with other genres, but it makes sense for this genre specifically. So that is at least on art. I think I do agree that RPG Zine Club does great work. Obviously I'm biased as well, but they do great work to support not just folks like you and me who've made a few games, but also a lot of other people who are totally new to the hobby but have a good idea, and they support, and nurture different artists. So I think that's not necessarily the only model, but it is a good model that's out there in 2026, which is, increasingly it's hard, right, to get anything actually produced, even though the tools are more and more sort of accessible. The costs involved and the noise of marketing, is just harder and harder. So shout out to Tony and Richard and their team. Before I let you go, is there anything else you want to plug? We're taping this on March 15th just as a way to kind of start a conversation. Of course, we'll have you back on and ask more about your history with games, but anything you have going on or anything you wanted to shout out?
So I mentioned the podcast, All Your Dream About Gaming Convention, the podcast you didn't know you needed about Gen Con, PAX Unplugged, Origins Game Fair, the WWR Convention Industrial Complex and beyond. In the WWR Industrial Convention Complex setting, we have Gary Con coming up, in, I think it'll be concluding in about a week's time. So I will not be there. My co-host Quarex will be there. And then there's also Adepticon the following weekend, which is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin now. And my co-host will be there as well. So if you want to reach out to us, linkter.ee/dreamaboutgamingconventions, because way back when we decided to make a podcast that is too long for Gmail or Gamma or a lot of things, because All Your Dream About Gaming Conventions is a lot of characters and the acronym does not make any sense to anybody. If you're interested in gaming conventions, come check that out. I will be at GameFace Con at the beginning of May, I think is one of the next ones that I think would probably appeal to the listeners of this particular podcast. I'll be around on the Sunday of Game Face, which is in Baltimore, Maryland. It's a great time. It's free. It's in a bar. I will probably be trying to run some FAFO or another game that I'm working on called Busted, which is, you play broke, even more broke Ghostbusters who have no budget. The equipment really doesn't work, but you're still trying to solve supernatural dilemmas on the behalf of businesses and governments. And I've got a new system working with that I'm still trying to kick the tires on before going a little broader. Another thing, this isn't something for me, but I was at Page in Philadelphia as well. I'm in DC, so Philly's close by, but not always the easiest hop, skip, and a jump away. But I was talking with a designer at Page, and he had done a zine called Archiver, ARKVYR, which is for Mothership, which is based, if you're familiar with Mothership as, a broader system, you are going to different dead space hulks and you're filming documentaries about what happened, and you're trying to get sort of like the last shot before you die. And so your memory lives on. And I know that, it doesn't map like for like, but I was talking with the designer about it, and I picked up a copy of it. And if you're somebody who likes Mothership, you're interested in Elise on art, Archiver would be another great thing to check out.
Yeah, we actually had Roger Maxino
really cool
on the show. Yeah.
Really cool book.
Yeah, I agree. So we had a whole episode about that. So that was Ben Eastman, and thanks for joining us for a quick teaser about Elise on art. And we will have to have you back, talk a little more about your work overall. This was just a shorty for Why We Roll. We'll also be, of course, at Game Face Con in Baltimore. And until then, thanks for tuning in. Happy gaming.
Thanks for listening to Why We Roll.
Our theme music is by the brilliant Sam Tyndall and Arpline.
If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You can find us on all social media at Stillfleet. You can find out more about Knots Macabre, Stillfleet, and all of our games over at stillfleet.com.
Hey there, I'm Hugh from Moderation. If you like today's episode, why not check out the next session? Your D&D Agony Aunt's there to answer all of your questions. Join Adam and Alyssa as they answer questions sent in by listeners like you about how to solve the problems that come with running and playing in all sorts of different tabletop scenarios. Available wherever you get your podcasts.